All right. We'll get started, and there might be a few folks who join in afterwards. So the topic of today's webinar is the development of the spatially explicit decision support tool for guiding habitat conservation for West Gulf Coast mottled ducks, one of the longest titled projects we have, perhaps. We've got Anna Krynick presenting for us today. Anna's currently working on her PhD in wildlife management at Texas A&M Kingsville at the Caesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute under the guidance of Dr. Bart Ballard, who is also with us on the phone today. Before joining Texas A&M, Anna graduated from Columbia University with a master's in conservation biology and a bachelor's in conservation biology from Syracuse, New York. So this project was one of the original strike team projects identified early on in the history of the LCC and has been a collaborative effort between the LCC and the Gulf Coast joint venture. So we are, we'll just wait a couple minutes maybe, and we'll get underway. Should also point out if we're going to have Anna go through her presentation, and then we'll have a few minutes at the end for questions. If you can use the phone for questions later on, and the chat tool that's available on the webinar as well. And we'd ask if you're not speaking or asking a question, if you could have your phone, make sure your phone's on mute because we are recording this. Folks who are just joining, Anna Krynick from Texas A&M University is doing our presentation today on the Mottled Duck Decision Support Tool. I should also mention that Anna currently holds a temporary GIS position while she's finishing her graduate work, and she's also president of the Wildlife and Agriculture Graduate Student Organization down at Texas A&M Kingsville. So welcome, Anna, and we might have a few more beeps, but let's get underway.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so as we all know, managers of the 21st century are faced with a lot of new challenges in protecting waterfowl habitat while also achieving population goals and dealing with an ever-increasing rate of habitat fragmentation, urban expansion, and, of course, limited funds. The idea of strategic habitat conservation has gained momentum in the past couple years in that it provides an adaptable framework based on biological planning, design, implementation, and monitoring to make the best informed decisions in the face of uncertainty. So many species have, and their habitats have already benefited from work by joint ventures all over the country implementing this framework, but we hope that the mottled duck will be the next such species. Recent estimates suggest that populations of mottled ducks in the western Gulf Coast region have declined by approximately 40% in the past 3 decades. And because they are a resident species, the mottled duck in this area must meet all of its life cycle requirements from the year-round habitat on the Gulf Coast marshes and associated areas. So in the Gulf Coast Joint Venture Mottled Duck Conservation Plan, experts have concluded that the factors most likely limiting population growth are related to recruitment and survival. The goal of this study was to develop a decision support tool or a decision support aid which would help managers in focusing efforts and resources in areas that would benefit mottled duck populations. So therefore, the model also focuses on these specific habitats that are vital to increasing nest success and brood survival. Our specific objectives were threefold. We wanted to develop models to identify areas where nesting and brood rearing habitat is currently suitable, and to identify areas where wetland enhancement or grassland establishment would eventually provide high-quality nesting and brood rearing habitat. Each of these models is based strictly on biological parameters, and their thresholds are agreed upon by a number of experts contributing input throughout the entire model building process. In addition, each of these models were prioritized on several landscape characteristics to guide management. So in order to accomplish this task, we used a number of different spatial data sets, some available through websites for public access, and here's just a short list of the crucial data sets without which a spatial model like this would not be possible. All of our intermediate data sets were actually derived using these 4 files, and eventually each of these data sets were analyzed through ArcGIS and ERDAS Imagine software to the extent of our area of spatial delivery, which encompasses the model duck range in Texas and Louisiana, shown here in red. The first phase of this decision support tool was to develop a model that identifies currently suitable model duck nesting and brood rearing habitat throughout the spatial boundary just shown in red. In order to determine this currently suitable nesting habitat for model ducks in this area, we used 4 biological parameters. Kind of an obvious characteristic is the type of habitat. We all know that model ducks won't just nest anywhere, and that, like most ground nesting ducks, they rely on dense grass cover to provide security from predators. A second characteristic that influences nest success of ground nesting ducks is size of the grassland patch. So in general, nest success is positively related to patch size, and this is primarily a function of the probability of a predator finding a nest in a larger patch versus a smaller patch. A third patch characteristic was shape or configuration in regard to edge to interior. Our thinking here was that we could still have grassland patches of habitat that were of the minimum size threshold, but had configurations that facilitated efficient predator searching. So, for example, long and narrow patches, or patches that are very convoluted or broken up with unsuitable habitat. And the last patch characteristic is how close a nesting patch lies in relation to brood rearing habitat. So when a clutch hatches, ducklings have to make their way across terrestrial habitat to typically the nearest suitable wetland. And at this early stage, they are most vulnerable to predators. So therefore, it's pretty safe to assume that the closer a patch is to a wetland, the better the odds of a brood making it there safely. To identify brood rearing habitat, the process was essentially the same, but with only 3 parameters. The first parameter we identified is wetland type. Again, we know that model duck broods will not be found in all areas where there's water. Suitable wetlands must have low salinity levels and abundant emergent vegetation, among many other characteristics. The second parameter was hydro period, and we define this term to mean how often, and this is in terms of years, a basin is inundated across a range of habitat conditions during the brood rearing period. And the third and final parameter was distance to suitable nesting patch, which was essentially the same process as that just described for the nesting habitat. After we've identified currently suitable nesting and brood rearing habitat, the next step is this process of prioritization. Based on results from previous research and in part from our stakeholder workshop, average brood movements over land are within 1 mile from nest site to brood rearing habitat. We use this distance to define our landscape around nesting and brood rearing patches for the prioritization process. So we prioritize nesting habitat on the nesting patch density, brood rearing wetland density, and distance to brood rearing wetlands. For the brood rearing patches, we prioritize based on 4 landscape parameters: density of brood rearing wetlands, nesting patch density, and distance to nesting patches, and hydro period. The result is a spatially explicit map that prioritizes the wetland habitat and the grassland habitat identified as currently suitable. So this image is a close-up of one such area that is characterized as high priority currently existing habitat. This is southeastern Louisiana, as most of you recognize, and here we could see high priority grasslands and wetlands represented in dark green and dark blue colors. You can see that there's larger patches of high priority habitat, and there's a couple small patches of high priority wetlands and nesting habitat here. As we move towards the coast, the priority level decreases. The colors get lighter. This is to be expected as there is a large amount of salt marsh and suitable wetland characteristics for brood rearing becomes scarcer. And this will be an important issue to keep in mind when we discuss wetland enhancement through freshwater later on in the presentation. So the next phase dealt with identifying and prioritizing wetland basins that could provide high-quality brood-rearing habitat strictly through freshwater enhancement actions. We used two biological parameters to identify basins with such a potential. So candidate basins for freshwater enhancement were limited to those wetland types classified as suitable by the first model. However, in this case, we also used our hydro period analysis to limit the potential basins for enhancement by focusing only on those wetlands that did not meet the minimum hydro period threshold, meaning we were not inundated with fresh water frequently enough during the brood rearing period. Once all wetland basins that were potentially suitable for freshwater enhancement were identified, we used the matrix of the surrounding landscape again to prioritize these patches for enhancement. And to go through some examples, I'm just going to focus on one region here in the Texas Mid-Coast, and it's going to be the same landscape for the examples that follow. So we calculated a measure of availability of suitable nesting habitat within a 1 mile landscape. And here is just an example of what the results of this parameter look like. Here, the polygons represent candidate wetland basins for freshwater enhancement. And in warmer colors, like these reds and oranges on the northeast side, are basins that have large tracts of nesting habitat within a 1 mile radius. The cooler colors on the southwestern side of this image represent basins that have a relatively lower amount of nesting habitat within a 1 mile landscape. So we also calculated a measure of availability of suitable brood rearing habitat within a 1 mile landscape. So here is that same landscape of wetland basins, and it's important to remember that this metric is an inverse. So the dark reds and oranges on the northeast side are those basins that have very few, if any, suitable brood-rearing wetlands within a 1 mile radius. And the cooler colors, the yellows and the light oranges on the southwestern side, are those basins that already have a number of functioning brood-rearing wetlands within a 1 mile landscape. So each of these parameters accounted for 50% of the final priority score. And once they were added, the final spatially explicit model shows a matrix of wetland basins that have been color-coded here to, again, represent high priority basins for freshwater enhancement in warm colors and lower priority wetland basins in cooler colors. And if we take a closer look at that same landscape we were just looking at, we can see that these wetlands are much higher priority for enhancement on the northeastern side than the wetland basins on the southwestern side. And this is because on this side we already have existing brood-rearing wetlands, while on the other side there is very little, and again, if any, suitable wetland habitat for mottled duck brood. Additionally, on this side there is less currently suitable nesting habitat, while on the northeastern side there are large tracts of currently suitable nesting habitat, which are not sufficiently serviced by brood-rearing wetlands. So therefore, priority for enhancement would be on the northeastern side. The third phase was to build a model that identifies and again prioritizes areas for grassland establishment. Here we use land cover types to identify areas where establishment could improve the quality of the habitat for nesting activities. Land cover type was limited to those areas outside the coastal zone and that are also classified as cultivated by the land cover data set. And also that are not wetlands that are potentially suitable, meaning they are of suitable type and hydroperiod, but do not currently have a grassland component within this 1 mile landscape that we defined. And prioritization was based on 4 separate parameters. Again, I'm going to focus on one region in the Texas Mid-Coast, just a little bit north of where the wetlands were, outlined with this white box. So the grassland value is a measure of suitable nesting cover type within a 1 mile landscape of any functioning brood-rearing wetland. And the derivation of this parameter is somewhat complicated, so I don't really have the time to go into here, but I'll be happy to answer any questions. So here's the image of the output of what this first parameter looks like. The warmer colors represent areas where grassland establishment is of higher priority because there is a lack of suitable nesting cover for mottled ducks. And the cooler colors represent lower priority for grassland establishment based on this first parameter. This first parameter accounted for 70% of the total priority score. Additionally, we prioritize these areas based on their distance from brood-rearing wetlands. So here, again, we're looking at the same exact landscape, now prioritized based on the distance from each potential patch for grassland establishment to the nearest brood-rearing wetlands. Warmer colors indicate areas that are adjacent to brood-rearing habitat, while cooler colors indicate areas that are further away from brood-rearing wetlands. However, it's still important to remember that those areas in blue are nevertheless within this 1 mile threshold of brood-rearing wetlands, and they're still candidates for grassland establishment. They're just of lower priority. Similarly, we prioritized areas for grassland establishment based on distance from suitable nesting land cover types. And again, the same exact landscape, but for the third parameter, but the difference between the 2 parameters is striking. The warmer colors represent higher priority, while the cooler colors again represent lower priority based on the distance from currently existing suitable nesting land cover types. And finally, we prioritize based on the number of brood-rearing wetlands a potential patch of established grassland would service. The same landscape, completely different results for this last parameter. The areas in warm colors, these reds and oranges that you see up here, represent potential patches of grassland that, if established, would service a large number of brood-rearing wetlands. So, for example, these areas might have 10 or 15 brood-rearing wetlands, while the areas in blue might only have 2 or 3 brood-rearing wetlands within this 1 mile landscape. And the last three parameters accounted for 10% each of the final priority rank. Once we added all four parameters, the final product is, again, a spatially explicit map that identifies and then prioritizes areas for grassland establishment. So, again, let us take a closer look at just a portion of this map. So here's an example of how areas in close proximity can vary in their degree of importance to grassland establishment. This is primarily due to the surrounding landscape, like we just saw the differences between those parameters and how they rank patches. Here are high priority areas in red, in oranges, and dark yellows. They represent areas that have suitable wetlands, brood-rearing wetlands within a mile, but are also lacking in grassland components. So they're represented as high priority for grassland establishment. However, if you look down here in the southwestern portion, this is a lower priority landscape for grassland establishment, and we can see why. There's already existing brood-rearing habitat in blue within a favorable matrix of existing nesting habitat for mottled ducks. These three products are meant to serve as a decision support tool to guide future management of wetlands and grasslands in a strategic manner based on biological parameters to increase mottled duck nest success and brood survival through basically optimization of landscape matrices. It is science-based and will result in efficient biological planning and design. And of course, pointed conservation delivery. Additionally, this tool has the ability to standardize mottled duck conservation in the western Gulf Coast to ensure that communication and management goals are approached from a coherent and complementary initiative. And finally, the decision support tool is an iterative and I want to stress adaptable model, which will no doubt improve and be revised as habitats become restored or even lost for that matter. So the next step in this model building process will be to distribute this information and tool capabilities to managers and stakeholders through initiative area team meetings and webinars such as this. And this tool will be managed and updated by the Gulf Coast Prairie LCC and the Gulf Coast Joint Venture, and will be available for managers and stakeholders through a website, which I believe will be established in the near future. And lastly, I want to stress that the decision support tool is a tool, and ground verification of sites is a must prior to any kind of management initiatives. It's not meant to be used as a decision-making process. It's meant to be used as a decision aid. So with that, I'd just like to thank you all and for everyone that has been such a big part of this and helped make this happen, and they've provided very significant input. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Anna. We have several members of the technical review team here with us in Lafayette today. Do we have any questions for Anna?
This is Woody. I have a question.
Go ahead, Woody.
So, were you able to go and like test your model results, either with historic data or?
Right, yes, so the validation or verification of the model, especially of the currently suitable habitat, wetland and nesting habitat, is definitely the next step. I know the Gulf Coast Joint Venture has an interest in validating the model, and we are currently looking into how this will be done, whether it will be with random points and ground verification or with surveys. We're just not at that point yet, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from anyone?
Yeah, hi, this is Brian Spears, the Fish and Wildlife Service in Fair Hope, Alabama. I'm sorry I missed the first couple of minutes of this presentation, so maybe you already covered this. I was glad to hear you say, Anna, that your model could be updated even given the loss of habitat. Looking at the Mississippi Delta, did you all evaluate whether we could stick SLAM modeling as an additional layer into this prioritization tool? I'm always curious when we talk about trying to restore this part of the world, and then think back to some of the sea level rise maps 50 and 100 years out, what our strategy should actually be there. So I'm curious to know whether we could actually overlay that model and if it would give us different strategies 10, 20, 50, 75 years out, where we should be working for Mottled.
That's a really good question, actually. So this model is meant to be updated every, I believe it's 5 years, because the habitat's not going to remain as it is now. And especially if you're looking at coastal zones, we use certain layers to take out these salt marsh habitats. But you're right, with sea level rise, like how far will saltwater intrusion affect these habitats on the coast? I believe that it would be very interesting and definitely beneficial to include the SLAM model and see how drastically that will shrink the available habitat. We haven't done that yet, and the way that the model is made, each parameter can be updated individually, and the model can be run over. So, especially since it's meant to help habitat management, you're going to have some habitats that are lost, whether it's saltwater intrusion or just urbanization, and you're also going to have habitats changed. So it's important to be able to go back, change the parameters on the newest available information, and run it again and see what the difference is. Does that kind of answer your question?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. And we do have another project that's nearing completion, I guess, in the next few months, where we're rerunning the SLAM scenarios for the whole entire Gulf. So maybe at that time we can look at some options to meld those two things.
Right, yeah.
So, and I'll just, in closing, I just want to thank Anna again and Bart and the technical review team who's been involved in this project. The final report for this project is just in review by the technical review team, so should be available soon. And as Anna mentioned, this model will be presented through some of the initiative team efforts over this fall and into early next winter. And we can also look at additional options for serving this information out to folks. I think that the intent is to put it on the Conservation Planning Atlas, this information and the data that backs it up as well. So any final comments, Bill? Or?
No, I think that, Anna, we, again, very much appreciate the diligence in this project, and it's really set a great benchmark for us to build on. I think we're all excited about where we can use this model to tie into just what Brian mentioned, the connection with sea level rise and scenario changes through time. So very, very good questions and very timely information to tie to those questions. So again, thanks to everyone for their.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I look forward to kind of validating it, because it will be interesting to see. Right.
And we did record this webinar, so it will be available on the website soon if folks want to send it out to other people within their organization. So I think that's a wrap for today. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll talk to you next month.